28 and had gotten down to verse 7. And the first 8 verses of this chapter is dealing with a description of the elders, which would be the leaders of the people. And he's dealing in reality with both the leaders of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, both aspects. When in verse 7 it says, "But they also have erred through wine and through strong drink, are out of the way. The priest and the prophet have erred through strong drink. They are swallowed up of wine. They are out of the way through strong drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment." The statement at the beginning, "they also." Isaiah is now dealing with specifically the southern kingdom of Judah. He's dealt with the northern kingdom, but now then he turns his attention specifically to the southern kingdom, and specifically Jerusalem. And the statement also basically tells us that Jerusalem, the southern kingdom, had become like Ephraim, or the Samaria, or the northern kingdom. And they were engaged in the same sins. There was basically no difference between them. I think we talked a little bit last week about the fact that they should have learned from the northern kingdom and seen the sins of the northern kingdom and also the results of that sin. But they, I think is normal with most people, they don't learn from history. And so they were doomed to repeat it and follow in the sins of the northern kingdom. This verse deals primarily, again, with beverage alcohol. And they, like Ephraim, if you look at verse 1, when woe is placed on the crown of pride to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower, which are on the head of the fat valleys of them that are overcome with wine. Let's skip down to verse 3. The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim. So you start seeing the sins of beverage alcohol. And I don't think we could go over enough about the wickedness of alcohol and drinking alcoholic beverages. It is repeatedly condemned through the Scriptures. Someone turn over to Isaiah chapter 5 and read verse 11 and then verse 22. Start with verse 11, Isaiah chapter 5. Okay, and then in verse 22. Okay. Again, woe is placed upon people who are drinking beverage alcohol. we sing a song, I think it was Brother Gallagher's favorite song, Beulah Land. Let's see, is it the last stanza that I've reached the land of corn and wine? Is that the first stanza? Okay, might be. Some songbooks changed that to I've reached the land of love divine because of the association of corn and wine with alcohol. Of course, that wasn't the actual reference that was being made, but it was the promised land. And the term Beulah land, or Beulah, which we'll get to actually later on in Isaiah, what's the meaning of the word? For years, I thought it meant beautiful, beauty. Anybody else think that? You're afraid to answer, aren't you? Because you know I'm going to say that's wrong. Actually, the meaning of the term Beulah means married. A land in which we are married. What is it? We're married to God or to Christ. They were married to God because of that promised land in which they resided in. We are married to Christ. We're the bride of Christ. But that's all as an aside. Now let's get back to the idea of alcoholism. But someone turn over to Isaiah 22 and read verse 13. By the way, here's one of those statements that we've combined through the years with a couple of other verses. How many times do we hear, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die? That phrase, as is not found in the Bible. You do find as here, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Or you find, let us eat, drink, and be merry. But without the tomorrow you die. So we've kind of combined those thoughts, but here, eat and drink. The drinking here is specifically dealing with the drinking of wine. Look at, somebody read Isaiah chapter 56. And in verse 12. Okay. Continued emphasis of the drinking and the condemnation of it. If we turn over to Hosea chapter 4, and let's read verse 11. Hosea 4 and verse 11. Whoredom and wine, new wine. Go over a few chapters to Hosea chapter 7 and verse 5. And what do we find? Notice, bottles of wine with scorners. That's what alcohol will do for us, make us a scorner. Then one last one, and then we'll make some comments about some things. But Amos 6 and verse 6. So here's, again, the wine, the drinking of it, and what happens? They're not grieved over the affliction of Joseph. As we've kind of indicated through all this, the Bible repeatedly, over and over and over, talks about the use of alcohol, and in it, and they use alcohol as a beverage. And in that, it is always associated with evil and debauchery. It is never associated with that which is good or right or wholesome. But always evil. And we've got a lot of brethren who will defend what is termed social drinking. As long as you don't get drunk, then it's all right. Has anyone ever heard of the phrase, one drink drunk? What does it mean? Just what it says? Okay, that's the point. Drunkenness is a matter of degrees, isn't it? Have you ever seen someone or heard of someone who is just a little tipsy? What is it? They're not really falling down, staggering over drunk, as opposed to someone who's soused, and that person is. Because why? We recognize a matter of degrees. If it takes, well, let's just say 10 drinks for a person to be what we would term drunk, then if you take one drink, you are one drink of that 10 drinks drunk. You are drunk, and to that extent or to that degree. And thus, it is always condemned as a beverage. One of the great passages that everyone who wants to drink appeals to would be 1 Timothy 5, where Paul tells Timothy to drink a little wine for his stomach's sake and his off infirmities. That was not beverage alcohol. That was medical alcohol. So if you're going to take that literally, anytime you drink any water, it's sinful. Drink no more water, but take a, well, if you drink no more water, that means anytime you drink water, you're sinning. Now, how many want to really argue that? It isn't telling him alcohol can be used for medicine. There are times in which Proverbs, for example, tells, give wine to this individual. Well, it's always from a medical standpoint in dulling the pain of that individual, basically. Sometimes it's during that death process, we'll give that person wine or alcohol wine to dull that process that he's going through. But that's far different than taking alcohol as a drink. as a beverage. That's why I try and specify beverage alcohol. We're drinking alcohol as a beverage, not as taking a medication. Another passage, turn over to Proverbs chapter 23. And in verses 29 and verse 30, we'll go on and read to the end of the chapter there. But who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? Now, those are the questions. It's really dealing with one question. Who is it? They that tarry long at wine, they that go to seek mixed wine. And so he tells them, look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. Thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. They have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When I shall awake, I will seek it yet again. You see in that a very strong condemnation of drinking alcohol, and specifically being drunk. And yet, when you look at that last phrase, they seek it yet again. How many have ever heard of Alcoholics Anonymous? If you haven't, where have you been living? Everyone has heard of it. Why? Why even have an organization like that? Because they recognize the difficulty of getting off of alcoholism and the problems that it brings, and yet when they wake up, what do? They seek it again. And they seek it again and again and again, and it's difficult to break that habit. That's what Solomon is talking about. They get into that need for that, depressant. And alcohol, by the way, is not a stimulant, as some have thought through the years. It is a depressant. But what does it depress first thing? Inhibitions, judgments, your ability to make moral judgment. And that's why they have so much difficulty in why all of these things are sins are associated with it. Because it depresses that ability in a person's mind to make those types of decisions that are right and just. Was supposed to calm your nerves. Yep, right. It's supposed to. That's a key word there, isn't it? But in a sense, it would cause you to be depressed, and thus, from that sense, calm the nerves. That would be true. Because it is and does serve as a depressant. Well, that's the main thing. Yeah, it suppresses the judgment, the ability to discern right and wrong. That's where it attacks first and foremost. Well, I was about to get to that aspect, and you got ahead of me a little bit. The Kings, Proverbs 31 and verse 4, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for the princes strong drink. Let me get another one aspect of it. In Leviticus chapter 10 and verses 8 through 11, the Lord spake unto Aaron, saying, Do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when thou go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. It shall be for a statute forever throughout your generations, and that ye put difference between holy and unholy, and between clean and unclean, or between unclean and clean, and that ye may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken unto them by the hand of Moses. It's not for kings. The priests are told, you drink alcohol and the service of the tabernacle, you die. In being a Christian, all Christians are priests. 1 Peter 2, verse 5 and verse 9. As such, what would be our relationship with drink or alcohol? You would not take it. All Christians are kings. We are reigning with Christ, reigning over sin and over Satan. If alcohol was not for kings and we are kings, then alcohol is not for us. And yet we have people defending drinking alcohol. I doubt that anyone here tonight would defend such, but we have brethren who, all over the United States, who will defend drinking alcohol. It is an indefensible sin. Right. Since elders are 1 Timothy 3 and verse 3, not to be given to wine. That's also in Titus 1 and verse 7. But deacons supposedly can be given to some wine, since it says much. Well, I'll just use one passage in James chapter 1. We are told that well, I'm going to have to turn over there now. I can't. My mind became blank and I can't quote it now. So I quote the one part that I want, superfluity of naughtiness. 21, that's what I was saying, James 1:21. Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted or the implanted word, which is able to save your soul. Once I got started, I could quote it, but superfluity, what does that mean? It means overflowing. So as long as naughtiness is not overflowing, it's all right to be naughty, right? Now that's the argument that is made with the much wine of the deacons in 1 Timothy 3. They're not to be given too much wine, so they can drink a little bit. Same principle. Lay apart all filthiness and overflowing of naughtiness. And isn't that how the New King James has it, overflowing? So as long as it's not overflowing, as long as you keep it in moderation, then it's all right. Correct? Now, I've never heard anyone argue that about this verse. I really haven't. And yet they would turn right around and argue that you can drink a little wine as long as you don't drink too much wine from 1 Timothy 3 and the qualifications of deacons. That doesn't make good sense, does it? If it means that in 1 Timothy 3 with qualifications of deacons, why doesn't it mean the same thing with here in James 1:21 with the superfluity or the overflowing of naughtiness? Just be a little naughty.
What constitutes naughtiness? It could be more than just one.
Well, certainly. Any naughtiness. It would be parallel with the filthiness of, lay apart all filthiness and overflowing of naughtiness. It's basically saying the same thing in different words, Carl.
It's like when it talks about Jesus being said, be angry but sin not. There's a point where
There is an anger that is permissible, but there is an anger that is not permissible, an anger that is sinful, as opposed to an anger that is not sinful. When that anger leads to certain sins and causes malice of heart, then that anger is sinful. It's not just, and I would say in making a comparison to that, let's just say here's malice of heart that the anger produces. Any malice of heart in that type of situation would be sinful. So any anger that causes that would be sinful. Not just a little anger, if it's causing that. Any anger that causes that would be sinful. But there's an anger that would be right and wholesome. Jesus was angry on many occasions when he drove the money changers out of the temple. He was angry. There's anger there. You can see it demonstrated. But it was not an anger that was sinful. In this naughtiness, you're dealing with sinfulness from a spiritual standpoint, though. So it's you lay apart, you separate yourself from any of that. But he uses that phrase, overflowing of naughtiness. But it doesn't mean that we can be a little bit. We have to lay it aside. It would be a violation of the first couple words, lay apart this. You have to separate yourself totally from filthiness and overflowing of naughtiness. Yeah. It's different ways of saying basically the same thing, though. You're not going to make a major distinction between filthiness and overflowing of naughtiness. You're dealing with the same type of sins. And however you describe it, it's something we have to lay apart, put it aside. Don't do it at all. But the parallel, and that's why it uses that phrase, superfluity or overflowing. Thus, if you can drink a little wine because it says not given to much wine, then you could have a little naughtiness based upon the same argument. They won't accept the little naughtiness, but they will accept the little bit of wine. That's the inconsistencies that is seen. Now, why spend so much time with it? The Bible does. The Bible literally deals with alcoholism continually. Just the few verses of the many that we read. And let's face it, it is a problem, a major problem in our society. If you go to any event, basically, it serves alcohol, whether it's a lot of them beer, sometimes it's wine, especially with a meal. You don't have wine with a meal? What's wrong with you? And so it is a problem within our society. That's why we have so many millions and millions of people who are drunkards today. And why an organization like Alcoholics Anonymous, along with other organizations that are just like that, are thriving today. Of course, now then it goes way beyond that into the use of illegal drugs as well.
Like it'd be the same thing if they ever make it legal for marijuana.
Have the same problems with marijuana, yes. And some of the places who have legalized medical marijuana, and that's a whole different subject. They see the problems because it comes down many times to people who do not have the medical need get it for recreational use. So, but I would make a distinction between medical marijuana and recreational use of marijuana. The medical marijuana, say the same thing with medical alcoholism, or I said that wrong. Medical alcohol. It's not beverage alcohol. It's medicine, and taking it for medicine. Marijuana can be taken for medicine. It has been shown to be effective in certain things. So, make a distinction between the two. The problem is that where it generally, where it has been legalized for medicine, it also increases the recreational use, and they start having difficulties because of that. So. And that's true because they legalized it. And what also took place, they legalized, even from the recreational use, certain, as long as you don't have it over a certain limit, then it's all right. And a lot of places are like that. But here, notice, they have also erred through this. That is literally to sway or to stagger because of their alcoholism. And while the King James has in that second phrase, and through strong drink are out of the way, the American Standard has stagger, which keeps the parallelism that you have in throughout Isaiah. Thus, Isaiah is showing the effects of alcoholism and drinking. We mentioned, he mentions here the priest and the prophet have erred through strong drink. We mentioned the priest a while ago in Leviticus 10, so we won't read that again. But it was specifically extended to the temple in Ezekiel 44 and verse 21. So, priest and the temple, they didn't go together. They did not mix. Injuries without cause. Mm-hmm. Because they were drinking. And they fall down and have all sorts of injuries. And when they wake up the next morning, what do? They seek it again. Yeah, the next verse is very graphic about this. It's difficult to imagine a priest during the Old Testament times, priest of God, attempting to minister to the things of God and yet having difficulty standing upright because he's drunk. Well, I will add this. I started not to, but the Roman Catholic Church has had a great deal of difficulty through the years with that very problem. The priest using alcohol in the Lord's Supper would get basically drunk. Many of them became drunkards because of that. And they had difficulty, thus, doing their service, doing their work. Well, that's the same thing that he's talking about here. These priests, can you imagine a prophet standing up to speak God's word? And his speech is slurred because he's drunk? That's what Solomon is dealing with here. In Proverbs 31 and verses 4 and 5, where it says, "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor princes strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted." He basically in this extends not only just to kings, but to all of the leaders of the land, because they would forget the law and they would pervert justice. Barry Hatcher, no relation, he wrote, "I find it interesting that intoxication is closely associated with defiance, disrespect, and insubordination. One can lump together words like reveling, orgy, intemperance, and riotous with wine and strong drink. Intoxication will deceive its partakers," Proverbs 20 and verse 1. "One may think he is ahead of the game of life, but is truly deceived." Paul lists drunkenness with sins of murder, envy, and such like, Galatians 5:21. Peter presented the truth when he revealed that man should not live after the lust of men, but follow God, and proceeds to mention excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, 1 Peter 4, verses 2 and 3. sins that are rooted in lust. Then he goes on to say the use of strong drink causes one to be able to function. The use of strong drink causes one to be unable to function properly. One's judgment is perverted, and justice is thrown to the wind. Under such conditions, it is no surprise to find stumbling and misuse of authority. And I thought that was very well stated. Verse 8 then continues with his very graphic depiction of the alcoholic when he says, "For all the tables are full of vomit and filthiness, so there is no place clean." Again, a very graphic figure, being full of vomit and filthiness, so that no place is clean. That's the drunkard, the alcoholic. Some have said that he is using metonymy here, and that the table is the spiritual food being served by the prophets, and the priest was devoid of spiritual teaching, and thus the vomit, the filthiness being spiritual in nature, not physical. If it is the case that metonymy is being used here, that the table does represent spiritual food, it can only be metonymy and have that application if the physical is that way. If the physical is not that way, then you can't make the comparison to the spiritual. And so the physical is full of vomit, the tables, physical tables, and there's no place clean from a physical standpoint. That's the only way it could apply to the spiritual. But the spiritual would be true as well, whether you take it as being metonymy or not. Either way, it's truth. We will start then, Lord willing, with verse 9 then, Lord willing, next week.